Large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. For the Sewerage and Water Board, the problem lately has been neither drainage nor flooding, but mechanics. This week, a turbine malfunction that caused a boil water advisory. The board is one of the many issues that candidates are discussing at forums. We'll hear about debates in the mayoral contest and the latest in the healthcare debate. We will discuss also the politics in the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's race. Contractor fraud has been a regional issue with losses in the millions. We'll discuss the latest in that. And we will hear about former Governor Buddy Roemer and how his life has changed. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Stephanie Grace, columnist at the New Orleans Advocate; Katie Moore, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4; and Ramon Vargas, reporter, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go on over to Katie first to talk about Sewerage and Water Board. Yet again this week, big news from the Sewerage and Water Board, and the fact that folks in the East Bank of Orleans Parish were under a boil water advisory for about 24 hours or so?
Yeah, it was about 24 hours until they got those samples back from the Department of Health to give the all clear to say that there's not any bacteria in the water that could cause you to get sick. But this is the 8th boil water advisory that we've had since Hurricane Katrina that we've been able to find. And, you know, there was a whole uproar when all of these first happened a few years ago. And so there was an emphasis placed on trying to prevent them in the future, which then we ended up getting $50 million from FEMA to build these water towers, but they're not done yet. So then we've got problems with the turbines, which also cause problems with the drainage pumps. So it's all, you know, sort of an interconnected system.
So what happened with this latest one?
All we know is that there was some sort of malfunction in Turbine 6. Turbine 6 is a brand new turbine in turbine years that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers after Hurricane Katrina. Corps built it, paid for it, spent $30 million to put that sucker in, even put a building around it. And it's the newest of the turbine. It packs a lot of power whenever it's working. It's been working as a backup to the other turbines that have all been down, except for one, since the August 5th floods and since we had that fire at the plant. And, you know, we were stuck with just these two working.
So, you know, since the August 5th flood, I mean, turbine now is in everybody's vernacular. Not many of us had turbines before if you weren't in the business.
Right.
So how we're looking with these turbines? I mean, like you said, this turbine that went down, it went down for a while, right? This was a new one. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is a new one. This is, again, the newest one that we have. Yeah. We don't know what the situation is with what caused it. All we know is that there was some sort of interruption to it and that it's been down, as far as I know, ever since. Now, the other turbines have had all of their a plethora of different issues with them, you know, since Hurricane Katrina and all of the damage that was done to the system by the flood water. It's been a slow effort to get these things back up and running. And I think one of the things that we've been really focused on in terms of investigations is figuring out where the money's gone, what it's been spent on, and why we're still in this situation 12 years later.
Okay, with all the staff changes lately at a really rapid period of time and at a high level, are things settling in? I mean, it seems like the perfect situation for mass confusion.
Yeah, you would think. But I think some of the people that were instrumental in running the Sewerage and Water Board are still there. Like Joe Becker is still there. He's there until the 30th of this month. So he's got that institutional knowledge. And then you have this management team that has come in from outside. But I think a lot of the people that really ran the day-to-day operations of the Sewerage and Water Board are still there. So that's good, except for the fact that, you know, we have obviously the mayor and everyone from him down saying we need to reform the way that we're doing these things. So
something, you know, if a turbine goes down, there's the Entergy power.
There's Entergy power,
okay?
yes.
And then there's another system of backups, and those are all the generators. So yes. You did stand-ups in front of some generators, but they're not online yet.
They're not online yet, no. These are the generators that the mayor said that he was going to buy and bring in after the August 5th flood. So he said, I'm going to spend this emergency money. We're going to buy all of these massive generators. There are 5 of them out there, and they make make that sort of ancient 25 cycle power that a lot of our pump systems run off of. So they're being specifically designed for the Sewage and Water Board, because hardly anybody uses that type of power anymore, it seems. And they're just not installed yet. They're not going to be installed and ready until early October.
So another issue that I saw that people were bringing up, aside from the fact that they couldn't use their water out of the faucet, was the fact that they weren't notified immediately. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, what was it, 4 weeks ago, people were just bolted out of bed at 3 a.m. with an alarm about, what was it? Was it about the
It was about the turbine fire.
Yeah, about the turbine, well, which indeed it was not a fire, so they're saying now it's more of an electrical issue. So, so why was there such a delay in letting people know about this?
You know, I think, I'll be honest, like this seems like less of a delay when you look back at the history of these boil water advisories. I mean, having an hour gap between when pressure dropped and when they notified the public, that actually isn't a lot of time in Sewage and Water Board standards, but the public has every right to say, hey, wait a second, you know, you guys are waking us up in the middle of the night to tell us that there's this electrical situation with one of the turbines several weeks ago, and now that we actually have a possible public health situation, it's taking a little while for that word to get out.
And it's when people are brushing their teeth and making coffee.
Yes.
And
Right.
Yes,
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Is the boil water advisory sort of a lawyer's thing to cover themselves legally, or is there any evidence to believe that the public really is in danger?
Yeah, there is evidence to believe that the public's in danger. I mean, if the problem with water pressure is that if it drops and there are holes in the system, bacteria can get into the water system. So if you live in certain parts of the system where you're turning on your tap and that bacteria may have crept into the system, it can make you sick. So it's a definite real public health hazard. The problem is they don't know whether or not it's there until they test it, and that sometimes takes a day, like we saw.
In the press conference the other day, Paul Rainwater, who's now heading sort of this management team, already looked pretty beleaguered with this whole situation. I mean, this is major problems that they're facing right now. And one thing that you brought up also is that, yes, we've got these other systems that can turn on, but they don't turn on right away.
No, they don't. They don't. There was a 20-minute delay in them making the decision. They knew what had happened. Rainwater said at that press conference, you know, we were notified immediately, we notified the mayor immediately, and then we all sort of tried to figure out what to do. Well, that process took 20 minutes. And normally, most of us, like even at Channel 4, we have massive generators that are on our property. They kick on as soon as the power goes off. There's no, you know, interruption in our broadcast for that reason, and you would think that that would be the same situation with our water system.
Okay, many problems to work on, and they assure us that they are continuing to work on them. Okay, Katie, thanks. Over to Stephanie, and certainly this issue of the Sewage and Water Board, you know, the governance of it, the issue of drainage, et cetera, has really surfaced as a major issue this race.
Sure, and I moderated a forum with the 6 top candidates on Wednesday, sponsored by a group of civic organizations up by the lake, and it's interesting, we had a lot of bottled water for people, and it was the day of the boil water advisory, so everybody got a laugh out of that. But it wasn't really funny, but we needed it. So so it has emerged. I think, you know, infrastructure was always going to be an issue, but it, you know, it could have been more roads than this, but you know, because of the flood and everything that's happened since, it really has emerged as an issue. And, you know, it's interesting, we have a couple candidates who have some real expertise in the area. You have Tommy Vassell, who used to be the president pro tem of the Sewage and Water Board, was very involved in getting some of the the federal money after Katrina. Troy Henry, who used to work at United Water, he was involved, you know, back when the privatization drive happened years ago. He was on the United Water team, so he's been looking at this for a long time. So, you know, you have some people who are basically saying, you know, we need the experts to get in there and see what's going on. They're not necessarily recommending specific changes other than, you know, professionalize, figure out how to professionalize. I actually asked about privatization, which would, for large-scale privatization, it would take a referendum. So it's a hard bar to, you know, meet, and nobody was for that. And I think that would be a very difficult sell with the public right now. I also asked about an idea that's out there to basically help pay for some of the drainage improvements. There's some talk, BGR, the Land Administration to some extent, of imposing a drainage fee, because they basically need $55 million to meet local obligations on some of these big drainage projects. And no takers on that either among these candidates, surprisingly.
Sewage and Water Board just, you know, implemented some rate hikes.
The rate hikes, but you know, there are the 3 different lines of income, and they have to stay separate. There's sewer, there's water, and there's drainage. So, and again, there are local matches for even these big federal projects that we're seeing, and you know, the money's coming due. again, Troy Henry said, you can't ask people just don't trust the agency. You can't ask for more money right now. It would be a very hard sell. LaToya Cantrell she didn't come out forward, but she did kind of mention an interesting aspect of it. They're talking about a fee as opposed to a tax. And with a fee, that means you would kind of get to some of these properties that are tax exempt because they're nonprofits, things like that. That's another big topic of conversation, all the properties that are, maybe not used for narrow nonprofit purposes, but that are not on the tax rolls. So a fee would, level the playing field a little bit. But that doesn't mean she's embracing it.
Are you really seeing this drainage issue sort of overcome now the public safety issue? Is that more on the
they're
voters'
one and
minds?
two. I mean, there's certainly a lot of talk of public safety. There were two interesting.
It also helps that, right now, this remarkable slowdown that kind of coincided with you see the slowdown in the pace of killings and hand in hand with the pace of shootings that are being reported, and this drainage crisis kind of bubbled up in the middle of that slowdown, which allowed it to kind of
one
be
rising
like
and one falling. Yes,
but
crime is a constant. I think people
yeah, and I mean
aren't.
it'll balance
It'll still
out.
be there.
It will.
Eventually,
One of the questions I asked, I think it's interesting that so many people are talking about NOPD and what we need to do about fighting crime, but really you don't hear a lot of talk about the leadership of the department. So I was curious whether people thought, Chief Harrison should keep his job. I think he's pretty well liked. And I asked, and three of them, Michael Bagneris, LaToya Cantrell, and Desiree Charbonnet, said they wanted to do searches, but they would certainly invite him to apply. Troy Henry said he wanted to do an evaluation first. The other two said Frank Scurlock was the last candidate, and Tommy Vassell, they said, no, I think we need a new chief. But, I think it's kind of interesting how that hasn't risen up as part of the conversation. It's much more how we get more cops on the street. And one of the topics that was very kind of hot at this forum was police details and the feeling that the restrictions that were put in under the federal consent decree were so severe that cops can't make the money they used to, and that's one of the reasons they're not signing up with the department or leaving. So the city's about to come out of this federal oversight, so there's definitely talk of revising that. That was another topic.
So certainly over these next weeks, there are going to be more forums. We know that. And we'll
Almost
be
every
more,
night, it feels like.
Right,
Sometimes
exactly,
two a night.
what those issues are and how they stand.
We
Thanks,
sympathize
Steph.
with the candidates, I have to say. It's tough going.
They made the choice to run.
They did,
So they
yes.
did indeed. Ramon, over to you. And another race that's going to be happening next year. It's not happening right now, but that is the race for Jefferson Parish Sheriff. Of course, Newell Norman surprised everybody, stepped down, and then sort of almost anointed who he would like to see as his successor, but other people have other things in mind.
Yeah, I think you've seen your first committed challenger to that plan to kind of leave the sheriff's office in the hands of Joseph Lopinto, who's been a state legislator, and he has also, I guess, worked in various capacities for the sheriff's office. Most recently, as the number two, really a chief deputy. Is what they call it at that agency. And but Johnny Fortunato, who I think if you're of a certain age and you follow the news, you certainly know who he is, you recognize his voice. And I think if you're going to look at like personalities of the last, legendary, Sheriff Harry Lee, and then Newell Norman, who kind of also carried that sometimes kind of larger than life kind of. I think Fortunato's more cut from that ilk as far as like the charisma, as far as being able to turn up the volume. I think a lot of the times reporters see it behind the scenes, maybe more so than when he's briefing the public through the media.
Yeah.
But he, But certainly, he's been there a long time. He's been a
Since
cop.
the 70s, yeah. So let's background him a little bit.
He's 46 years in the agency. He announced his retirement this week. I think that's one of the things that he can kind of point to is that I think a lot of people will sometimes try to make his candidacy seem less legitimate because he's a spokesman, right? And he's been there so long, but at the same time, he was a cop, and he got shot near the neck trying to capture a suspect at some point, and that was a while ago. But at the same time, and he's definitely comes from a long line of law enforcers, and like I said, he's got the name recognition to I think be really disruptive to the plan to try to leave the agency in the hands of Joseph Lopinto.
And it's interesting because it's almost like the call coming from inside the house situation. I think the feeling was going to be that Newell Norman, the sheriff's department, would have its candidate, and there would be challenges from other camps. But this is really, one and perhaps more challenge from the people who've been at JPSO for a really long time.
Sure.
And under the two sheriffs.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think I think it's less likely, certainly. Craig Tefero, who is facing some federal legal problems over some tax issues, has also I think made noise through friends that he's considering a run. I think that's what Stephanie was referring to as far as a house
For a business
that
he had with Newell Normand, actually.
and I mean, I think Sheriff Lee and Sheriff Normand certainly had that house kind of everyone pulling in one, at least publicly, and now you're starting to see some fissures because of an unexpected kind of departure from the man who was atop and had really shown no indication that he was going to step down, and really that rumor caught fire the night before and became reality late the next morning.
And it was kind of surprising that he just looked to Lopinto. I mean, some of the rank and file, as I read it, were really sort of almost
He's very young, and he hadn't been there
put
very
off by it.
long. I mean, he has a good law enforcement background.
Yeah,
but-
certainly. I mean, he certainly worked in various capacities on
and
like
worked
the
in
law
criminal
enforcement
justice
side.
issues in the legislature.
Sure, and in the sheriff's office too. So he worked for a little bit, left to the state legislature for a little bit longer, and then kind of came back. And I don't think he had been back quite a year when he was announced as kind of like the chosen successor for Newell
Well,
Normand.
he's the sheriff now, so that's what we're
Yes.
seeing as
Absolutely.
sheriff of Jefferson Parish.
And maybe one other factor in this, and that's the legacy of Harry Lee,
Yeah.
who was around for so long and who was so popular. And of course, Newell Normand was his choice.
like a son to him,
And then
yes.
and Lopinto was Newell Normand's choice. And so, to the extent that legacy exists, that's a factor also.
And it's interesting. I mean, Newell Normand has always kind of, cast Harry Lee as a very important figure in his life, and Johnny Fortunato, in his announcement, did the same thing, saying that he was one of the most influential men in his life. And I'm not entirely sure how much Lopinto can maybe claim that, given the time away that he spent away
Right.
when he was at the legislature.
And this is just the beginning of the
So
race
who's
is
the
actually
real-
next spring.
Who's
and
the
so
real Harry Lee heir in
Yeah.
this? Is maybe the
I
question.
think that's going to be something that's going to be
Yeah.
up for debate throughout the campaign.
And other candidates may jump into the fray too. Okay,
Sure.
thanks a lot, Ramon. We're going to go over to Errol now. And you did an interview earlier this week with former Governor Buddy Rowan.
Yeah, he was in town. He was publicizing a book about Scapina, which was the plantation that his family grew up in south of Shreveport. And he was speaking at Octavia Bookstore. And I got to tell you, the reason I was asked to do this was because I was advised that he hasn't been in good health. If you remember Buddy Romer, I mean, when he was first elected, when he was governor, young, very active-looking guy, loved to talk and just very youthful. But he's had some physical problems, and he talks openly about it. He talks about it in his in the prologue to his book and at the presentation. One thing is he had a stroke 4 years ago, and so that affects his speaking ability. He speaks very deliberately, and then he's had diabetes type 1 since he was 29. And that also affects it. And even his daughter said, I don't know if he can go past 20 minutes with this, but we'll try. Well, he could have gone all night, okay? I mean, once the thing started, he got involved with it. It was slow in its talking, but his mind is still good, and he had some good stories to tell. And it was kind of just good to kind of revisit that period of time. And the book is really about his youth, even though we talked a little bit about his politics also. But one impression I had when he was talking about the early days was he talked about the days in the 50s that one of the things they did at the plantation is they raised cotton. And they were talking about the days that the cotton picking machines came, the electronic cotton picking machines that could pick 2 rows at a time. And prior to that, they brought in workers. They brought in field workers. Each morning, a bus would come in from Shreveport. I think it was about 100 workers or so, and they'd pick cotton. And most of them were black, and he was very sensitive about that. And he said that his father was very sensitive about the black laborers, and that they had a little store on the plantation, that they were very fair in their pricing, and that their attitude was good.
They ate
But
meals together.
that they all ate together and they got together, and his father was very progressive in talking about him. But still, he says, once the cotton picking machines came, and I guess this was across the South, they didn't need as much labor. I mean, this is like what goes on in the industry everywhere else. And so gradually that pool dwindled. And then ultimately, what happened to those people? A lot of them wound up just moving to the north to work in industry up there, in heavy industry. And so that was really probably part of the beginning of a huge migration once those machines came into play. But a couple of things from when he ran for governor that I thought were interesting. I remember when he ran for governor, this was in '87, he was kind of running in the middle of the field. And the local favorite in this area was Bob Livingston. And I remember when the Times-Picayune endorsed Buddy Roemer, that was big news because it was news that here was the Picayune, which was at the time was the biggest and most important newspaper in the state, endorsing a congressman from North Louisiana over Bob Livingston, over Billy Tozan. So it became a big news story. And it led to TV news. And I mentioned that, and Roemer says that night he and the other candidates were at a debate in Monroe, and he says Edwin Edwards came up to him that night and said, "You've won." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "You've won the election tonight." And indeed, a few weeks later, on election night, Roemer led the primary like with 33%, and Edwards ran. It would have been a runoff, 26%. And Edwards called Roemer and said, "I'm not going to campaign."
Right. And
so again, affirmed that he'd won. Of course, it denied Roemer ever getting a majority win either, and so he won on that.
So I'm going to have to wrap you
Okay.
up right now with the book. It's Scopina.
Yeah.
The story of Buddy Roemer. Sounds
Right,
like
it's
an
got a lot of
interesting
good stories in
man.
it, too.
Okay, thanks a lot, E. Over to Katie. You've been over the years doing stories about contractors who didn't do the work. They took the money, they didn't do the work. And one of them you profiled last night is going to serve time for it.
He is. He's going to serve 7 years in jail, which is great for the victims who are out there. And that's for 3 different cases in Jefferson Parish that he was involved in. And this all, the genesis of all this is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is a federal funding source, and the state administers it and has been since, I don't know, 2010. And you know, it allows people to elevate their homes and storm-proof their homes and flood-proof their homes so that it could take some of the burden off of the federal flood insurance program. So the idea is to get people high and dry so that they don't flood again, and that's why the feds have played such a role in funding these things. So in Louisiana, it was almost like it was a pot of gold for these contractors who came in and said, you know, I can get these grants really easily. I can, you know, basically just go sell these people on, hey, let me elevate your house, and there's this pot of money there, and I can pretty easily get my hands on it. And so there were a lot of contractors out there, including this guy named Ernest Blackwell, who really took advantage of the system. And in Ernest's case, you know, we see with this guilty plea that he was not just taking advantage of the program, but he was taking advantage of the people who should have been served.
Whose houses were just rendered unlivable.
Unlivable. I mean, the woman that I talked to, her name is Cindy Butler, and she has been living in a FEMA trailer on her property since 2012. I mean, Blackwell tried to raise her house in Marrero and just basically snapped it in half. And so after that, the parish came in and said, you're going to have to, you know, make this house at least stable so it doesn't fall. And so then Ernest came back in and put some steel beams in it, ran some, you know, tunnels underneath her house. And so then he elevated it, and it's just been sitting there on these beams, cracked in half. She can't go inside. She can't get her stuff ever
So
since.
she's finally going to be able to build something, though.
She is. She's getting another grant from Jefferson Parish, yeah, to be able to get back into a home.
Okay, so basically, you know, have these types of contractors been identified and taken care of now, or
you know, the state has been trying to go after them. I first reported on this last year when I did another update on Ernest, but they're trying to recoup the money, and they're up to $38 million that they've discovered that contractors have taken from this program and not met the terms of the grants.
Very disturbing. All right, Katie, thanks. I'm going to go over quickly now to Stephanie and our Senator Cassidy. In the news again, Jimmy Kimmel doesn't like him now.
You know, it's amazing. You think 2 years ago, who outside of Louisiana had ever heard of Bill Cassidy? He had just been elected. He had never passed any major legislation. 3 nights in a row, he's been the subject of Jimmy Kimmel's monologue, and not in a good way.
No,
And
where he was on Jimmy Kimmel's good side for a while
again,
there.
he didn't start off picking a fight. He started off trying to kind of use Jimmy Kimmel's viral video about his son who was born with a heart defect and had to have very expensive surgery. Jimmy Kimmel, a number of months ago, came on and you know, made a very emotional plea to Congress to protect people who are not wealthy like him in these situations, to preserve protection for people who have pre-existing conditions and not reinstitute lifetime limits on coverage, the kind of things that could really devastate a family that doesn't have the resources he has. And Bill Cassidy, who is working on a Republican bill to repeal and replace Obamacare, saw that, and he said, you know what, I'm not going to support anything that doesn't pass the Jimmy Kimmel test.
Well, flash forward to now, and there's new legislation,
now.
the Graham-Cassidy bill.
Right, and Jimmy Kimmel has looked at this legislation and said, The guy came on and lied to my face. That's what he said. It does not meet his criteria. Stop using my name if you're going to be pushing this bill. The bill is running into real trouble. They have to pass it by next week under the kind of loophole that allows them to do it with 50 votes. They lost John McCain today, who is a very big vote. This could be the end of it. We don't know for sure. We've said that before. I've said that before, so I wouldn't say it definitively now. But, you know, it's interesting that he's now a national figure because of this bill that it looks like is, you know, a really big challenge right now and is very unpopular, I have to say. So,
well, and then how would it impact? And we know we've had Medicaid expansion here, and basically this bill
it would have
ultimately
undone
would get rid of
that.
it.
This was a bill that would have basically handed a lot of money to states. It would have really given more money to states that did not expand Medicaid, that kind of did not take care of their people, and taken money away from states like Louisiana. Certainly, Governor John Bel Edwards was very much against it, even though they've tried to work together on health care. They're both kind of centrists in some ways. But, you know, it would have really hurt California and New York and, you know, shifted money to Texas.
Well, it's still alive. It's still there right now.
It's still alive. There are two. It looks like it may come down to Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski again. They helped kill the last version. And again, they only have till next week.
Right, they're up against the clock so that they can work within the reconciliation process.
Yes, and after that, they would have to get 60 votes, and that's going to be impossible because that means getting Democratic votes.
Okay, and of course, you know, Senators Cassidy and Graham say, you know, this is hogwash, what Jimmy Kimmel is saying, and others are
but
they're
as
saying that's
Jimmy
not really
Kimmel
the case.
points out, John Kennedy went on TV and said, well, he's not an expert, we shouldn't listen to him. And Jimmy Kimmel said, you know what, you're right. Let's listen to all the experts. And he listed all the medical groups that are against this, and it's pretty much everyone.
Okay, well, healthcare debate continues. So we'll see what happens with it this week in the Senate.
Yes.
All right, time to look ahead.
Well, this Sunday the Saints are in Charlotte, and they're playing. But after that, they're going to London for a week. In October 1st, they play in London. They play Miami. The thing to know about that is because of the time difference, that game will come on at 8:30 in the morning. So you can watch the Saints while eating breakfast, and the game will be over in time for lunch. October 1st. So plan ahead.
It's like Wimbledon, except
That's right, exactly.
breakfast is.
Stephanie.
Okay, there have been a lot of mayoral debates. There's one coming up that's a little bit different. There will be no candidates speaking. I'm going to be participating. It's Thursday at 6 o'clock at the New Orleans Jazz Market, sponsored by a group called Forward New Orleans, which is a very big coalition of, you know, interest groups, activist groups, the Business Council, the Urban League, people in housing, environment, all kinds of things. And it's going to be a discussion about mayoral issues. Clancy Dubose will be moderating. I'll be appearing with Ron Fauché, the pollster, Stacey Head from the City Council, and Oliver Thomas, the former councilman. 6 o'clock on Thursday.
All right, very good.
It's kind of a dream team.
Yeah.
Storage and Water Board, you know, we're watching it very closely, and so we're looking ahead to see what the problems are, how we've gotten here, and where we go from in the future.
Okay. Ron?
There's one man actively campaigning to become the next coroner of New Orleans after incumbent Jeffrey Rouse surprisingly abandoned his reelection campaign a few weeks ago. The lone person, that man, Dwight McKenna, Dr. Dwight McKenna, has made it very apparent that he's worried about there being some kind of campaign to deny him and a vote for the quitter type campaign. Hasn't manifested itself, but as we get closer, it's something worth watching to see if someone does organize some kind of campaign like that.
And I have to also say, on September 27th, which is Wednesday, 5 p.m., WYS will be streaming live yet another forum. This one is going to be focusing on early childhood learning opportunities. It's sponsored by the Coalition for Grade Level Reading, and Channel 12 is going to host it here, and we're going to be streaming at 5 o'clock, WYS.org. All right, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.